going on, my people, my people? How you doing? Welcome to another episode of Through a Culture Lens. I'm your host, Michael Anthony, and with me, as always, the illustrious, the wonderful, the person who never had acne as a teenager, Miss Amber Gray. How you doing, girl?
Excellent. The lies you tell. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. It was Father's Day weekend. It was Juneteenth.
Yeah,
feels like
so it was a lot.
It feels like that's going to be something I can get excited for. With it being
Exactly.
Juneteenth one day and then Father's Day the next. So I'm feeling good. I'm feeling fresh. I'm feeling, clean. How about you?
I'm glad. The top of my feet hurt from all the moving and line dancing and Cupid shuffling I did this weekend. I'm very tired, but it was a great weekend. I'm glad you had a good one.
I did. And of course, our third host today, of course, this is a pre-recorded show, so you will not be joining us in the chat. But, today we will be in the comments and in the chat with you during this screening. We do have a special guest with us today.
Very excited.
We have Miss Charlene Polite Corley, is it correct?
That's it. That's me. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic.
Great.
And she is the VP of Diverse Insights and Partnerships at Nielsen. And of course, you guys know that we've had these previous shows about Nielsen kind of dissecting the data. So we wanted to bring a representative from Nielsen who actually wrote these reports to come on the show and give us a little insight.
That's right. So happy to have you. Thank you for being on.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited for the conversation and, look forward to it.
Great. Let's start with just kind of your background. Like what's your education? Give us some details about yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah. Well, as Michael said, I'm Charlene Polite Corley, and I've been with Nielsen for about 12 years. Most of that time was actually in the client service side of our television business. So I was the local station rep for several different markets, and then I moved into national television. So working with cable networks, syndicators, producers, and helping them understand data trends and new services and all of that. But sort of my passion project during all of that time, especially showing up in the way that I do in this business, was always a heart for representation in media and diversity in media. So that was sort of like my personal championing +1 project throughout my career. But last year I got a chance to actually pivot and make that my day job. And
awesome.
So now in this role, I get to use that background, hearing the voice of our client with that passion for diversity, and tell unique stories with Nielsen data from the vast measurement that we have around trends in content. And then where I went to school, shouldn't have asked. I'm a proud Rattler that went to Florida A&M University. So that is where I went to school, and then joined Nielsen about 12 years ago, like I mentioned.
Awesome.
Okay. I was going to say, I thought you went to an HBCU. I was about to pull that out,
Yeah. You know it's going to come out.
It is.
It always does. We always got to say it. It slips into conversation every time.
It is. But if you could you tell us a little bit about what the Diverse Insights and Partnership is at Nielsen?
Sure. Yes. So really what all that title is saying is that it's the work of my role in our team to use our data to shine a light on underrepresented communities. So a lot of times the headlines around Nielsen will be around those bigger, broader general market trends. But because everything we do at Nielsen, we are really about measuring people. And so in order to gain the trust of those people to actually be a part of our panels, to take our surveys, to agree to share their information, we know so much more about them. And we know that who you are and how you identify is a big part of the content that you might be attracted to. And also importantly, the advertising branding messages that you're receptive to. So the more that we can get our clients and industry thinking in that direction and taking action in that direction, we see that as imperative to our business. So in order to do that, yes, it's Nielsen's data, but it's also about community partners. It's about the storytellers in the community. It's about the advocates and our clients. So that's that partnership piece. And the thought leadership, research, and insight is the other part of that title.
Okay, excellent.
Very nice.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about Juneteenth, which has obviously been a hot, topic the last week, really. It hasn't been, I think the last year we've kind of all been talking about it. I think we did a block party like in my neighborhood last year, with 2020 being kind of the racial reckoning year. With the government taking steps, with the reparations bill for Oklahoma, for the Tulsa massacre, and of course, Juneteenth declared a national holiday. What role do you think media has played in some of these like major governmental steps that have taken place?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked this question because it is really powerful to see that without a program like maybe The Watchmen, that the conversation and the volume of conversation around something like Tulsa may not have been able to catch momentum the way that it did. I just think about, how long that story went untold. I didn't learn about that until I was basically an adult in college at FAM and got to take African American history. It was not something in the history books. So actually, we again, in the chair that I'm sitting in, if I know about it, you're going to learn about it. So we did a piece actually looking at, Blacks in Tulsa today, and what is recovery still looking like 100 years later? Measures of ownership, and beyond like what was lost. I think where media comes in and the power to like tell a story is also the power to not tell it. So we really focused on that controlling the narrative of Black people, the controlling of the narrative or the limiting of the narrative of African American achievement in particular. And I feel like the role of media has such a part to play when it comes to telling the whole truth. Telling, shining a light on, what was achieved and how it was lost. That's really important. Going back to, the program on HBO, Watchmen, the superheroes may not have been real, but the villains that day in Tulsa definitely were. And I think a lot of folks found out for the first time when tuning into that program. Not to say that there's not been great documentary work. There's been years of research and labor, to keep this alive and continue to advance, especially for the survivors. But there's something about that storytelling when you can incorporate it into, oh, I'm here for my sci-fi, whatever. There was just something about that powerful storytelling in that regard that I think is really moving the needle on some of these initiatives. So I hope it continues. I think the last year, there's definitely been a lot of negatives, but one of the major positives I think is really having some folks perceptive and open up to learning more and understanding like we don't know the whole story, but it's up to media to help tell it.
Yeah, that's a really good point because me and Amber, we've talked about how Watchmen and both Lovecraft, how both of them spoke about the Tulsa and then even Emmett Till and sort of how that drove the conversation. And it's almost like now narrative storytelling is almost having the same impact as documentary in a way, because documentary, whenever you had like Super Size Me and all these What's the Health and these things like that, it started this whole health movement. You've had different documentaries about social justice and things like that, even the earlier documentaries to like the slave narratives, but those were, once again, like documentary telling the truth. But now you have these fictional stories telling these real life events, and then it's actually having a more of an impact.
100%. And actually our data had some really great examples of this, both documentary and the narrative storytelling, from two of Ava DuVernay's pieces, viewing to When They See Us and 13th, after the murder of George Floyd. In our data, the viewing the week after that increased exponentially. I'm talking like four digits percent increase week over week to the title of 13th, which I'm pretty sure, I think it came out in like 2015. Like we're talking a few years old, right? Even when we look at, again, a documentary like the Black Panther, Vanguard of a Revolution.
Yeah, one of my favorites.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, people turning to content, not just documentary, but also the storytelling to like really make that connection, to be heard, to hear that side of what they may have missed, and to make some connections about what is, how I see playing out on the news or in the street connected to this larger system. So again, right there in the data, that first week, showing like exponential increase, but people from all kinds of backgrounds tuning in to multiple kinds of content to really try and help understand or just get informed. Great point.
Yeah, so I know one of the pieces, and of course we're talking about this, is representation matters. So what was sort of your motivation for being involved in making sure that this report came out around the time that it did, because this is, came out, I believe, February of this year.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So, we released one of our diverse intelligence series reports focused on the Black family, and really just kind of taking pause to look back at, all the things that we've been through just in the last few months at that time. A lot of the headlines, of course, were focused on the impact of COVID-19 and the outsized impact that had, particularly in our communities and families. But what I wanted to really make clear in that was not the only crisis we were fighting. We have a vaccine for COVID. Not quite sure we found the vaccine for racism yet. When I think about the conversations that I have to have with my family, with my son, it's definitely about, put your mask on, and let's make sure that we are also, being cognizant or aware of also racial threats that are out there. That is something that's a reality for our families. And so we wanted to share some of the perspective and data, of course, that brought that to life. As I mentioned, a lot of the top line takeaways sometimes, we can get caught up in the numbers, but putting that narrative and that humanizing perspective on it sometimes really does make a difference. It showed up quite clearly on January 6th, and that was really important for us to shine a light on, because the data showed that Black children were watching news at 4 times the rate of US kids overall the week of the insurrection on the Capitol. And, I think that was, for me, just validation that we have to have certain conversations in our households and with our kids and partners and family members that other folks may not be thinking about, and that was showing up in the data. So it's important for us to continue conversations like that.
Mm-hmm. And then the diversity reports, who do you make them for? Are they for the average consumer, or are they for for programming purposes, and do they change and shift the dial with programming, these reports that you all create?
It's a great question. So we are trying to hit a lot of audiences with our reports. We do focus on a lot of the data points because we want to show to our clients the opportunity and also the imperative that you get this right. If you are not talking about, diversity and the changing dynamics and demographics of our country in your growth strategy, you might have a problem growing. At a certain point. We're talking 40% of our population today. So it's really important that you understand some of the nuance and care and legacy and, trajectory of different communities if you plan on earning their dollar. Yeah. One of the, byproducts of the racial reckoning of the last year is, people are also just more cognizant of where they're spending their time, where they're spending their money, and who they're willing to do business with. And so I think it's imperative on all of us to do the work and consider that we might have to earn that business in a way that we haven't before. So that's one audience for sure. And then we also always want to, give this basically to the community. We don't charge for these reports. And so again, all those partners that I talked about earlier as a part of who we're engaging with our team and in my role, we want to say, hey, here is a work that that we're doing for you to help advocate for your goals and for your folks in your community. And we do love when average consumers or researchers can find value in it as well. But I would say those are the primary audiences, because we know with Nielsen's data involved, it can help inspire change. And I remember when I was working in the client service role, so many times, like my clients are asking, like, when is the next one coming out? Because I've got to take this data point to have a way to start this conversation with my boss, with decision maker, whoever. And, when we have data, that does open doors. But what really is going to change hearts and minds is, again, that humanizing perspective and the storytelling piece of it. So we try to do a little bit of both.
Very nice, very nice. And of course, got to ask, I don't know anybody got a Nielsen box. Amber don't know nobody got a Nielsen box.
Never known anyone.
My cousins, my family, the people who's going to be in the chat later. So The thing is, though, and of course we read the reports and see that you guys use the census as sort of a baseline, and then how you sort of do, because could you talk us a little bit through, that whole process?
Sure. I love this question. So being a Nielsen family or a Nielsen panelist is a little bit like winning the lottery. So everything we do when it comes to our representative panels, we want it to be grounded in the census. It's a little model mini United States or local market, just like you mentioned. But the other side of that is it's all driven by science. So it's a randomly selected, multiple part recruitment step that I'll talk a little bit more about. But the other main part is you're not supposed to know who is a Nielsen participant. Okay. So when we recruit them,
shrouded in secrecy.
Right. Yes. So when we recruit them, we instruct them to, please keep this confidential, because certain folks, I don't know, like a TV network might be very interested to know who's got that, who's participating in our panel. But just to zoom out for a second. So again, it's like winning the lottery because it's a random selection of anybody with an address in the United States. We use and define like whose address is qualified. We use this similar definition as the census. So like certain group housing and things like that are qualified. But then we maintain a army of field and membership recruiters who are going out and knocking on doors. And the instruction from the randomization process will literally be like, we need this zip code, this block, this number house. And so there's a lot of instructions in detail that help promote all of the data science behind the panel that I'm not an expert in, but I can get you some experts. And so that is like part of that random selection to say, this is the TV household that should represent this area, this demographic. In addition to that, just like you mentioned, so we want to have a certain proportion of representation throughout our panel to align with the market that we are trying to project and represent. So if it's, for our purposes, TV households among the Black community are about 14%. So that is like the universe estimate, we call it, that we will project out to. So we're definitely trying to recruit to have that balance of representation. We can go over and under sometimes, and so they use weighting and other mechanisms to make sure that it all lines up. But we take that data science very seriously, and it's all those different measures of quality that I think why Nielsen data has been trusted for so long. But yeah, it is like winning the lottery, and it is supposed to be a secret.
Okay. Well, that's good to know, because one of the things when we talked about, the report that had the themes of being seen on screen, I believe that particular report. So the themes is where we talked about when we brought up the Nielsen report for our last couple of episodes. We talked about the themes that came up in that. We're like, well, what is the sample size that this is the themes that keep coming up for Black women and for Black men? And it really gave us pause. We're like, wow. So okay, so he's got it up right there. So one of the themes that, of course, that Michael and I have talked about a lot, of course, was the Black women and then the rivalry thing, right? And like the sons and some of these things that we saw specific to Black women that were completely, on the opposite for white women and their viewing habits and Asian women and their viewing habits.
Y'all had next to each other.
Exactly. So it looks so completely different.
Intentionally.
Right.
Let's talk about that.
Let's talk about that for sure.
Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I really, really love this slide, because in addition to the ratings and the Nielsen homes and panelists that are measuring who's in the audience, right? Nielsen also captures a ton of metadata about the programming being made and the programming airing on your television. So when you go to your lineup and see the description and all of that. So one of the pieces in the metadata that we measure are the content themes that are airing. And so what we were able to do in this report is to say, for the most viewed programs that included this identity group, like Black women in the cast, what was the theme most prominent in the content viewed by the audience? So we're not ascribing, or saying, this is what Black women like. This is when Black women were cast, what do they have permission to play? When white women are cast, who do they have permission to be on TV?
I see. Okay.
When Black men appear on screen, what is the most common way that you are seeing Black men presented in television content? And, same thing for our Asian talent. When you see them, what are the narratives that they get to portray as talent in television programming? And the reason why we lined these up the way that we did was to show that even though, for example, representation of Black folks on television, their share of screen time, actually outpaces our, percent of the population. So for 2020, it was around 16% share of screen, more than our population, right? But who we have permission to be on screen is still limited.
Yeah.
So when we look at top programming, we look at most viewed programming, what is coming and filtering up to the top still remains in some very narrow lanes. And there's certainly an explosion of content, and we see these diverse audiences going and seeking out diversity of genres, roles, more and expanded stories, because there is a little bit of fatigue in seeing the same trope when it comes to underrepresented communities. Now, for most of us, if it's got diverse representation in it, like I will, I'll support, I'll go check it out. Mm-hmm. But we love to see the expansion that's happening in content where it's not just one thing. Mm-hmm. And because so often that top content, you might get that one good film a year or whatever, that one opportunity to tell a Black story or Asian story, we put so much emphasis and weight on that. And so this was about the opportunity to tell more diverse stories. And when we look at this by platform and genres, we definitely saw platforms like streaming offering more diversity of genre and content and theme. And we think that is a huge driver to why we see people of color in particular migrating to these platforms to look at streaming content at higher rates. Right. So that's what this sort of circle is telling us, that, if I turn on, white women are the ones who get to fall in love. Asian talent is the one who gets to pursue justice, Yeah. But when it comes to my identity group, I am a single mom who's going through some type of conflict, or it's a crime from the streets, and, it's urban themed programming.
Right.
So what we were trying to display here is, here's what the ecosystem is looking like today, and look at all the white space, no pun intended, about where we could go. So I hope that helps make sense.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, I think that's great. Sorry, I know we're doing a recording, but I have people out there mowing the lawn, so that sound kind of okay. Got caught up in here. But great points, and I think that kind of segues to like your newest paper that you wrote, "Breaking the Cycle of Silencing Black Voices." You just wrote it, I believe, in June. Correct?
Yes.
And so in there, you mentioned about Black talent on television today is high, but the themes and roles of African Americans are most often seen in are limited primarily to reality shows, dramas, horror, sports, music, and urban-themed programming. And so that, we did a show before about tropes, about Black tropes, about the mammies and the bucks and the Sambos and things like that.
Jezebel.
Yeah. Are those themes, or those tropes sort of still being perpetrated in these themes to where it's like hard to see African Americans in another role that's diverse? Is it sort of like a conditioning thing, would you say?
I do think that stereotypes still play a big role when it comes to casting, when it comes to getting opportunity. What audiences are used to seeing is still used as a lot of influence or maybe permission to cast in a traditional way, instead of, taking a risk on putting somebody who hasn't played that role before into the role. I hope that we're not seeing out and out racism as frequently as maybe that we did in the past, but I do think that longstanding stereotypes and tropes still are a lens that are hard to break through when you really are talking about changing storytelling long-term and at a larger scale. There's just a lot in that casting process or in that hiring process that still is influencing today. Yeah. I think that's exactly right. And so when we celebrate, something like Bridgerton, where you get to see a historical Regency,
gonna say that.
Piece with my girl Lady Danbury front and center. There's a reason why that broke, all kinds of records. People who are tuning in to kind of see this display and delight. I wish it wasn't seen as a risk, but take the risk.
Right. I agree. I think one of the things that we always talk about is even when we do see something like Bridgerton, because I was going to bring that up, so I'm glad you segued into that. Even when we do see a show like Bridgerton that has that colorblind casting, you still will see some, the Black community saying, this is unbelievable. This is hard for me to even wrap my head around with them not even bringing up the fact that, we're slavery in this conversation during this time period, where it's like we still almost have this lens where we still want that realism and kind of that, that downtrodden experience that we've had in America, even in these kind of unrealistic fantasy type shows. So it's almost like we're driving that narrative in our programming where we want something that we can connect to and relate to. And when we get something more, fantastical like a Bridgerton, it's hard for us to really relax on that and relate to it.
And I think it depends on like the type of viewer you are. So for me, for like most of the media I consume, I'm about escapism. I want to like detach from the news headlines.
Yep.
So fantastical period piece, yes, sign me up.
Same.
I think a lot of it though stems from, well, if we had, if I've got to pick between where I want to be represented, there's so much of the African-American experience and story that you have not told.
Right.
So if you're going to cast us, if you're going to do something, tell a story. I mean, going back to, we were talking about Juneteenth and Tulsa, tell a story that is going to move the needle, that's going to have some impact, that, is, shining a light on something that was buried. I can totally understand that. But again, going back to, our discussion from earlier around Watchmen, when we can combine those two things, and I think that artful storytelling that pulls in or combines that opportunity to really, drive that historical foundation or that untold story, it makes it more accessible, I think, for a lot of viewers who aren't just tuning in for the documentary, but also learn something from their new favorite, sci-fi series or superhero series, for that matter, where they explored a little piece of reality as a part of that. Again, there's so much room for more stories, more content, that yes, greenlight all of that.
Exactly.
Then we don't have to pick.
Exactly. I definitely think Watchmen, out of that kind of, narrative / historical drama, I think they really just knocked it out of the park, because you didn't have to be so ingrained in the racial dynamics. I mean, obviously they had like the what was it, Redfordations, like his reparations, like Robert Redford's, specific type of reparations, right? So it's like there was some nuggets of, of things that we've talked about, obviously, in realism, but just that whole superhero aspect really was, we were able to kind of disconnect and kind of get into a place where we were, kicking butt and taking names and also doing it in the name of, the Tulsa Massacre, and also kind of adding those nuggets in without feeling so depressed, like you're watching 12 Years a Slave or you're watching something that is heavy. So it was nice how they tackled the heavy with that kind of fantastic. I think they did a great job. And I want to see more of that too. I want to see way more of that.
And one of the points that we made in the Being Seen on Screen report was, media has such power to drive influence of ideology, of, aspiration and all of that. And so again, it's meeting what the audience and what the community wants to see, but it's also, an opportunity for aspiration and for that fantastical, sort of experience that only the magic of television or movies, right, can do.
Right.
So I hope we embrace both going forward, and that we don't have to choose between, like, let's make the historical documentary or, the escapist. Like, the demand is there for inclusive content. It's not just Black people who tune in to watch Black leading roles. And I think the more that we embrace that going forward, the richer our content options will be.
Yeah,
agreed.
Yeah, couldn't agree even more. But of course, I have to counter a little bit, because there's a little something that's bothering me. Every time I turn on Netflix, every time I turn on HBO Max or Hulu, I see a category called Black Stories. Now, I understand that after the racial reckoning that we keep referring back to, what happened with George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, Black History Month. Okay, I can understand you want to sort of curate a catalog of diverse Black stories to sort of highlight. The thing is, though, it's almost July, and we still have these categories to where it's feeling like Black stories are now becoming a genre of storytelling rather than stories that have Black people in it being a part of those genres.
Right.
And so just want to get your feeling on that, because it's a pet peeve of mine that every time I'm like, I've talked to some people, they'd be like, well, at least I know where the stories are. Like, yeah, but I mean, come on.
It's lazy. It's a little lazy. It's like, it's like if I want to watch an action drama that has a black cast, I want to go to the action section. But I understand it's a little alley-oop that I think Netflix and Hulu and all them are trying to do, but it is a little lazy.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's definitely something we've seen more of. The examples I gave earlier with the Ava DuVernay's program, they surfaced, I think, in large part because Netflix chose to do the Black Lives Matter collection last summer, and that really put front and center. They promoted it when you logged in, and so that made it really accessible for a lot of viewers who normally, hadn't been going to like hunt and peck, right, to find it.
Right.
So I think that immediately the reaction was, oh yeah, let's group this for the folks who are interested in being seen, right? But just like we talked about, again, if I'm looking for, a really serious emotional documentary and it's next to a lighthearted comedy, that's, those are two different lanes. So again, when it comes to, we talk about this a lot, when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, yes, taking action and making progress is fantastic, and we celebrate that. But this is part of why we want to continue the conversation and the work of our team, because the nuance that it takes to have that work land right and be received is ongoing. So that was great in the immediate wake of last year.
Right.
We might have a different need now, especially as adoption among African-American audiences to have streaming content has continued to increase quarter over quarter in our data. So there's more of us with access to those sources, right? And so how and what I'm looking for as an audience member might be evolving, and so our selections hopefully will do the same. But you're right, they saw the opportunity to curate, and I think that was a big prompt for the trend, because there's a demand for diverse content.
Yeah, no, and I don't see any problem with it. I mean, even for Latin History Month, they curated, Latin films. But the thing is, though, once Latin History Month was over, those movies went back into their proper categories.
Respective categories, yeah.
Whenever they did the Asian Pacific and, the Asian
Pacific Islander.
Pacific Islander month, they had those curated. But then once that month was over, they let those go back into their perspective, their respective categories, or themes and genres. So that's the only thing that's just my little pet peeve. So sorry.
Yeah, it'll be.
Don't mean to digress too much.
It'll be interesting to see how that continues to evolve. I think one of the use cases that we have been talking about with our inclusion analytics and the metadata is to better understand, how are your audience members looking to discover content, and how do you make it easier for them to discover the content that resonates. Right. And so we hope that's work that we can continue to get to do.
Right.
Yeah, that would be great, because that was one thing, even growing up, where I just wanted to watch a romantic comedy, and I wanted that to just be something that was well written. I didn't care who was the main character or the protagonist or the antagonist. But it seemed like obviously it was, geared towards white audiences, because that wasn't necessarily the genre that they would put Black people in. But it'd be nice, as we get down this, diverse, hopefully road of content creation, where we are going to be able to see in the romance, genre with Asian couples and LGBTQ couples, and they're just all mixed in, and Black couples, they're all just mixed into the one category. So I can't wait to get to that.
But movies like that don't always have to point back to their heritage. So like with the Asian movies and with Black movies, it's like it always has to point back to our culture, but with Love Story, like Love Actually, or even Something About Mary, it had nothing to do about Jewish people whatsoever. But then you have Love in Basketball, Love in Hip, or not Love in Hip Hop, what's the Brown Sugar, and Best Man, and Best Man, all of them always have, even Crazy Rich Asians, all of them have to defer back to the culture to tie them in. But then for white films, it don't necessarily have to do that.
It's the default kind of thing with them.
Right.
And I think that goes back to, when we were talking about the stereotypes and just like the legacy of how things get cast. Is it enough to just have like a group of girlfriends who are going through life and, dating or whatever, just zooming in on how life is evolving and happening in those folks' lives, like you said, without the force function of tying it back to something. That's not a lot of the content that we get to be a part of. And like you said, I'm excited for more of those stories to come to life. But again, it's a balance, right? Because our audiences are like, well, how do you make a Black movie and not talk about,
and that was my next thing. It's like, yeah, exactly. Because that's been my main kind of pushback. Whenever he and I have this conversation, I'm like, the audience, I'm sure, is mainly requesting that connection to the heritage in order to kind of feel comfortable with watching whatever content. They want to make sure that if it's a Korean movie, that there's some sort of connection to the Korean culture and Black. Like, it's a hard balance.
Or the storyteller, right?
Yeah.
Saying like, you cannot cut this scene. Like, this is the scene that I dreamt about seeing when I was a kid who thought I'd never be a writer. Like, this cannot be cut.
Right.
So it really, it's if it was easy, it'd be fixed by now.
True.
Yeah. Well, I think we are about at the end of our show, I believe, because Miss Corley, she took some time out of her busy day to come and speak to us, to drop these gems on the fam today. So we just appreciate, the time that you've given us to us. And then I guess, would you like to leave us with some thoughts, and of course I would like to ask if we can maybe bring you back on, maybe in a couple of months, do something. We can talk about it though. I know Patricia's somewhere there. We can rap about it, because I feel like this conversation can definitely go in so many different areas. And we talked about an older report, and I know you guys have some newer information that I think that our audience would love to have. So hopefully we can have you back on.
And maybe by the end of the year, we'll see even better diversity numbers. So yeah, we'd love to hear that update.
Yes, stay tuned. I just want to end by saying thank you so much for giving me and Nielsen the opportunity to come in and speak with you and your audience. I love these kinds of conversations because, again, if we can debunk, a preconceived notion or myth and give you some data to go and do your own business and inform others, that's always a privilege. So if there's any other questions that pop up, feel free to reach out, and look forward to coming back soon with some new information about how we're doing now and continuing to celebrate our progress. So thanks so much for the invite.
Thank
Absolutely.
you for coming.
Not a problem. But we're going to keep you on for one because we're about to talk about what our next episode is going to be. And our next episode, we're going to be talking about African diasporic cinema. Remember, that's when we're going to be talking about Nollywood. This is sort of like another multi-part series that we're going to do to sort of focus in on, filmmaking that's not within America, that talks about the diaspora, and see if there are really similar themes around the diaspora that speak to the same stories that we have here in America.
That's right. Let's get diverse. Let's get even more diverse within the Black community.
Absolutely. Even more diverse. Intersectionality. Absolutely 100%.
Yeah. So, so hopefully maybe, you can tune in. You can be in the chat there, Charlene, with us. So, but once again, appreciate your time. And, we just like to, of course, thank, Charlene for, being on the show with us. And as you can see, we have the chat down below. It's not there because you guys weren't here with us today, and we miss you guys, family. But, just tune in next week, and we'll have some more dynamic content for you. And, of course, if you have any questions for Charlene, please put them in the comment sections, and we'll try and relay them back over to her and get an answer for you. But, Amber, any closing remarks?
No, this is a great show. And this really, the theme conversation, Charlene explained that perfectly, because I think we've been spinning our wheels with that one, and she explained that, and that's the one I really wanted to talk about. So it was a pleasure having her on. Hopefully we can have her on in a couple months from now, but really looking forward to continuing this diverse conversation, because that's all we talk about is more content, more diverse content. We need it all. We're tired of the same old stuff. So this was a good conversation. I hope you guys like it. Please, we'll be in the chat at 6. Write all the comments you want. We'll be there answering your questions. And
like, subscribe, share, hit that notification bell, all that good stuff. Y'all know the deal.
You already know.
But we love y'all, and love, peace, and power.
See y'all later.